The U.S. president has had 100 days to make America great again. So how's he doing? And how's he reshaping his country's role in the world? I'm Imran Garda, and today's newsmaker is Donald Trump. Welcome to our new and improved Newsmakers, where we'll now bring you an entire hour of in-depth reports, challenging perspectives, and debates that make you think. We begin these 60 minutes with a look at Donald Trump's eventful first few months in office. He says his first 100 days have been just about the most successful in the country's history. But according to polls, at this point, Donald Trump's the least popular president in decades. Critics have called him dishonest and dangerous, someone who's ignored precedents and protocols. For a president picked to shake up the system, he seems to be delivering. But it's his foreign policy that's kept the world guessing. He's withdrawn from trade deals, bombed Syria and Afghanistan, and has threatened North Korea. Is he an isolationist, an interventionist, or a realist? We begin with this report from Sandra Gatman.
Donald J. Trump wanted a different role for America.
We will stop racing to topple foreign regimes that we know nothing about. Instead, our focus must be on defeating terrorism.
As U.S. president, he pledged to put
America first
and U-turn U.S. foreign policy, from ripping up trade agreements to rethinking the Iran deal and questioning commitment to NATO. Many expected President Trump was going to rein in U.S. engagement abroad. But in the Middle East, where he pledged to focus on destroying Daesh, President Trump has made surprising moves. After 6 years of war in Syria, these images of a reported chemical attack by the Syrian regime prompted a military reaction from Washington: the destruction of an airbase by 59 Tomahawk missiles. The U.S. also used its most potent 10-ton non-nuclear bomb for the first time against Daesh targets in Afghanistan. In Yemen, Trump authorized a U.S. Special Forces raid in his first Middle East engagement as president. On the Israeli-Palestinian issue, Trump's administration has openly taken sides.
The days of Israel bashing are over.
So too, it seems, is a policy of condemnation against North Korea's continuing nuclear missile tests.
The policy of strategic patience has ended. We're exploring a new range of diplomatic, security, and economic measures. All options are on the table.
100 days into his presidency, Trump's foreign policy appears to be taking some shape, but remains unpredictable.
Our military strength will be questioned by no one, but neither will our dedication to peace.
In an increasingly volatile international arena, he still shoulders the question that has confronted other U.S. presidents: to act or not to act. Sandra Gatman, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined now from Washington, D.C. by Atiba Madjun. He's the founder of Party Politics US, a firm that analyzes American demographics. And from Fort Lauderdale in Florida, we have radio show host John Cardillo. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Atiba, how has President Trump done after 100 days?
Well, let's just first say the president did a great job first getting elected. I think he ran a brilliant campaign, which a lot of people who are in this resist movement here may disagree with. But since he's become president over this first 100 days, he has not done a good job of being credible. He said a lot of things that a lot of people feel a lot of mistrust about, as well as he's not done what I'd like to see him do in those first 100 days, or any president, and bring the country together. It seems as if right now the country is more divided than it's ever been, and there are a lot of accusations that the former president had divided the country along the lines of race. But I think that right now we have issues with immigration, we have race, we have religion, we have travel bans, we have just so many different things that are coming at us that the country is divided, and he has not done a good job in this first 100 days doing so, and it's indicative of what his polling numbers are telling us.
John Cardillo, not credible and divisive. What do you think?
No, I absolutely disagree. Look, I don't like the concept of the first 100 days anyway. Understand the history of the United States. From the time of our revolution, our secession from England, to the ratification of our Constitution was 15 years. And then we placed this ridiculous bar on modern-day presidents of 100 days. But that being said, Barack Obama divided this nation to what might be an irreparable place. He was a terrible, terrible divider. Donald Trump can't be expected to repair 8 years of that disaster in a mere 100 days. But he's done some outstanding things. Look, North Korea has been a global threat to countries all over the world, including Turkey. It's a lot closer to Turkey than it is to the U.S. And it can destabilize the region, and that can creep into Europe very quickly. Donald Trump is the first president in modern history to get China to side with us to refuse North Korean coal shipments in favor of U.S. goods to put pressure on North Korea. He's got Russia at the table talking about Assad in Syria. He single-handedly saved the coal and energy exploration industry in the United States. He's done an outstanding job. And as for the polls, these are the same polls that were predicting a 92% chance of a Hillary Clinton win on election night, had Hillary Clinton up 12%, 7%. So forgive me if I pay these polls no mind and give them, the polls, no credibility.
Okay, but they're not necessarily the same polls, and they do give us a bit of an indication. You've mentioned a bunch of things, particularly a lot of foreign policy as well, John, and we're going to separate these out as we go along and broaden it out as we go along. But let's talk a little bit about those approval ratings at 100 days historically. Let's call up this little graphic, which our viewers will see, which will show you Trump compared to other presidents historically after 100 days. Trump at 42%, Barack Obama, his predecessor, at 65%, George W. Bush at 53%, Bill Clinton at 45%. I know you don't want to take this seriously, John, but why is he doing such a lousy job in terms of the approval ratings after 100 days, particularly when you compare him to the other presidents?
Well, that graphic in abstract means very little. You have to dig into the crosstabs of those polls, which I do daily on my show and in the analyses I write. And when you look at those polls, the pollsters tend to move left. So many of those polls they oversample Democrats. They oversample non-Trump voters, Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama supporters, by 7 to 9%. So those results don't surprise me, but they're not representative of the electorate. They're simply not representative of the true sentiment in America. There's overwhelming support for the president.
Atiba, it's not representative of the true sentiment in America. What do you think?
Look, we've been all around the country, and in Florida, where John is, I've talked to people on the ground who voted for President Trump. Many of them are telling us that they regret the decision, and they regretted that decision just days after the election. The reality of this is that we live in a country where we have an electoral process to elect the President of the United States that gives us, I won't say skewed numbers, but it doesn't give us the real dynamic of what it is that the electorate is doing, because the states essentially end up voting for the president using the Electoral College. But here are the numbers. 62 million people voted for Donald Trump. 65 million people voted for Hillary Clinton. Unfortunately, 71 million people stayed on the sideline, and 7 million people also voted for Jill Stein and Gary Johnson, who were the other two candidates in the race. Regardless of whether or not you want to say that Obama was a divider or not, I'd like to believe that he was at least very comforting in terms of, as president, his tone, what he said, what it was that he tried to work toward. The issues that we have right now is we really do have a divided country, and the country became more divided because of the fact that we did have a man who happened to be black, who was president of the United States, who at least, in my opinion, did appear to be president of the United States, not just of our country, but he was a good representative for us around the world. Here we are 100 days into President Trump's, 102 days into President Trump's presidency, and he still hasn't traveled across the pond or gone to another country. We need, I mean, in terms of when we talk about uniting, the rest of the world, other citizens in other countries are also not very happy with what we have here as president. I think the president, and I do want the president to do, I want him to do exceptionally well. His success is indicative of like our success. It's a good representation for the rest of the world. So many people depend on our country to do well.
Right.
But if our country is split and divided, that is what's going to happen to the rest of the world.
Okay. John Cardillo, are you convinced that he has drained the swamp? He promised to drain the swamp. He's appointed his daughter, his son-in-law. Flynn had ties to Russia and so on. He didn't drain the swamp, did he?
Well, first of all, those are two different issues. I've seen zero evidence that General Flynn did anything wrong, but we'll reserve that for another discussion. Zero evidence. There's anecdotal anonymous sources. Look, I'm not a fan of the president's family being in the West Wing so close to the president. I'm not a fan of that. And I've been very public about not defending that. But to a couple of Ativa's other points, Donald Trump is president of the United States of America. He's not president of the rest of the world. So I don't care that in his first 3 months he hasn't traveled abroad. And frankly, Barack Obama weakened us around the world. Barack Obama created the vacuum that saw the rise of ISIS. Barack Obama created the vacuum in Libya. His foreign policy was absolutely abysmal. And Barack Obama's foreign policy led to things like Brexit. It led to things like the rise of Marine Le Pen in France. So to say Barack Obama did a good job on the international stage is kind of laughable. It was very, very weak. Now, there are things that I've been critical of with the Trump administration. The fact that Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner do seem to be in a policy role that they might be a bit in over their heads. I'm not a fan of that. I'm not so partisan that I won't admit that. But overwhelmingly, I think the president has gone to work, and he has a tremendous disaster to repair that Barack Obama caused. He can't really be traveling around the world doing apology tours like Barack Obama did. He said he was putting America first. That's exactly what he's doing.
Okay. And the Trump administration put out an ad to mark 100 days. This is what people saw on their TVs and came across on their social media feeds in the past few days. Have a look.
Donald Trump, sworn in as president 100 days ago. America has rarely seen such success. A respected Supreme Court justice confirmed. Companies investing in American jobs again. America becoming more energy independent. Regulations that kill American jobs eliminated. The biggest tax cut plan in history. You wouldn't know it from watching the news. America is winning, and President Trump is making America great again.
I'm Donald Trump, and I approve this message.
Let's bring in Ahmed Majidyar now. He's the director of the Iran Observed Project at the Middle East Institute. Ahmed, before I get into some of the foreign policy conundrums and the debates as we go along, when you heard that ad from the Trump administration, did any of it sound credible to you?
Well, I think that on domestic issues, the Supreme Court justice has been one of President Trump's achievements. But other than that, I don't see any notable achievements so far. He definitely had problem with the healthcare, which was his biggest, topped his agenda. But on the other hand, when it comes to foreign policy issues, he has had more bipartisan support from the Congress than on his domestic agenda.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting, because on healthcare, he seemed to have been stymied by Congress. On the Muslim ban or immigration, the Supreme Court was in his way. Checks and balances of democracy, I guess, Atiba. But on foreign policy, can you say he's been predictable at all, Atiba? Do we actually know what his policy is?
Nothing about this president is predictable. And I'm not going to say that that's a bad thing. I mean, when you're playing in this arena, you don't want to always show your hand. I also think, though, in terms of the relationship building, that there's a big divide, and I think a big question right now is that's coming from a lot of our foreign leaders is how do they approach the president, how do they treat him, how do they talk with him, and I think that we'll see more and we'll understand more over the next 100 days moving forward by their actions and how this all plays out.
Ahmed, do you still think he's going to rip up the Iran deal?
I don't think so. Of course, during the campaign season, he described the Iran deal as one of the worst deals ever and promised to tear it up once he's in office. But so far, we have seen that he's not walked away from the Iran deal. He has asked his administration to conduct an interagency review of the deal. But my belief is that he will stick to the deal, but on the other hand, will increase pressure in cooperation with regional allies to push back against Iran's influence in the region, and also on Iran's non-nuclear activities such as the ballistic missile program. But canceling the deal is easier said than done. That's because the nuclear agreement is not a bipartisan deal between the United States and Iran. There are 5 other parties to the deal, and also much of the agreement is also enshrined in the UN Security Council Resolution 2231. So he has understood that walking away from deal is not easy, but definitely he has taken a tougher line on Iran.
John, would that be an admission, perhaps, that there's some value to President Obama's deal with the Iranians?
No, I don't think so. I think it's more a byproduct of what the gentleman just said. I mean, there's a lot of moving parts to the deal, but I do believe sanctions are going to be ramped up on Iran. And look, they know that they can't trifle with Trump. They knew that they could push Obama around. Barack Obama was very malleable. Donald Trump isn't. North Korea is seeing that now, and Russia saw that in Syria. And so I think that Iran will be a lot more compliant. Look, I wish he would tear the deal up and throw it away. I think it was a ridiculous deal, and the UN never puts teeth on any resolution. They let the bad guys get away with whatever they're going to get away with. So all things being equal, I wish he would. I understand the moving parts, and I understand the complexity of just exiting the deal. But I do believe he's going to put some teeth behind that deal and force compliance. And if they don't comply, I do believe he and Secretary Tillerson, our Secretary of State, will tear the thing up and exit the deal.
Atiba, might there be some buyer's remorse from those who might have voted for him because it was America first and it was staying out of everybody else's business? And then he dropped the mother of all bombs on Afghanistan. He's locking horns with the North Koreans. He bombed the Assad regime in Syria and so on. I haven't followed the polls. You have. Are many thinking, hold on, what happened to America first? What happened to staying out of everybody else's business?
You know, someone said earlier about the 100 days. I think John did. You know, this first 100 days, it goes really fast. You know, and in terms of buyer's remorse, we still have a long way to go before this president's first term is up. So if we have buyer's remorse, we need to get, you know, put on our boots and get to work, because what is also happening, I mean, the president, he tried to get this border wall piece funded. They did not put that in the 6-month agreement that Congress just came up with. The questions here is not just about buyer's remorse. What I think and what I give credit to this president for is that he's made the citizens of this country more engaged in this process. There are more Americans and more people now that when we're going around the country that are engaged and are understanding what the issues are. Yesterday, the Washington Post printed a story about the president, and it said that the president did not know that their job of being president was this difficult. I think that when people are critical of any one of the presidents, I mean, I love there was a comedian that talked about impersonated George W. Bush. Do you miss me now? There are a lot of people that have criticized our past presidents without recognizing the weight of the job. And so I think that what we're also seeing now is that President Trump is...
Yeah, is that more people being engaged, or rather just that mainly liberal media for 8 years didn't question Barack Obama, and suddenly they realize their job is to question the president? Might that be a part of it as well, Atiba?
Whether it was liberal media or not, conservative media was definitely critical of the president, and you know, I think one of the things that was my big argument with people in general, citizens were not critical of the president. Yes, he made some huge mistakes in the Middle East. That's why we're in the situation we are right now in Syria. But you know, whether or not you like or don't like the Iran deal, or for instance, I mean, right here within our hemisphere, whether or not you like or don't like the decision that he made on Cuba, I think that the president tried to make some steps to put us in a better situation. It is up for us, the citizens of this country, as well as the citizens of the world, to hold our elected officials accountable to make sure that they make the right decisions and don't put us in harm's way. Right. My concern is that what this president is doing with his rhetoric and with us not understanding what he may do is putting us in a dangerous position.
Okay, John Cardillo, are you salivating at the prospect of liberals rolling up their sleeves and arguing with you and being more engaged because Trump is president and they don't like it?
Well, look, it's great for all of us on air when they do that. I will say, I agree 95% with everything Atiba just said. I think it was a really spot-on analysis. It was a great analysis, actually, except for the last part. I don't think Donald Trump puts us at risk in any way, shape, or form. But look, I will say this. We have a Congress here, and the establishment Republicans in Congress are probably more aligned with Democrats on many things than with the president. And I will also agree with Atiba. The base social media has made the average American voter much more engaged and much more intelligent and knowledgeable about the inside baseball, if you will, of politics, the little nuances that go on between senators and congresspeople, how they cut their deals. And I think those things, when they see how big of a swamp it is and how they're really removed from that process, they're powerless, it's why they gravitate to a Donald Trump. And of course, look, the liberal media is always going to do what they do. But last point, and where I wholeheartedly agree with Atiba's analysis, is we need to question our leaders. I'm an ardent Trump supporter. I've been. And earlier in the show, I said, hey, look, I'm not comfortable with the way his daughter and son-in-law are setting some policy. Well, man, I get attacked by Trump supporters for saying that. But if we don't, as Americans, question our president, critique things our president, our elected officials do, we're dropping the ball. We're not doing our constitutional duty as Americans, as constituents.
Ahmed, if you were a foreign ambassador or were in foreign intelligence and you were trying to detect some sort of pattern to this president's approach to foreign policy and his policy in general, would you be able to define him after 100 days?
No, I wouldn't. I think that it's too soon to define the Trump administration foreign policy doctrine, or even his policy towards specific foreign policy challenges, whether it's Iran, Syria, North Korea, Russia, China, or more. I think that it has been very unpredictable. And at the same time, we see contradictions from different team members of the Trump administration, whether it's the administration's ambassador to the UN or Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, about Iran, about Syria, for example, about the future of Assad's role, and so on. So there is an unpredictability. I think that the component of unpredictability in foreign policy sometimes can be helpful, especially in negotiations. But because the United States is just the leader of the world, I don't think that it has to be unpredictable. It has to be very clear in outlining its values, its policies, and send a very clear message to both friends and enemies across the world, so that the allies can just rely on the United States, and also the enemies know that what the U.S. policies should be.
Well, so far it appears the president doesn't want to be predictable. He's certainly shaken up the political culture and the way people engage with it. I've really enjoyed this discussion, gentlemen, but unfortunately I've got to wrap. John Cardillo, Atiba Madjun and Ahmed Majidyar, it's been a pleasure. Thanks a lot. Still to come on the Newsmakers, when one border fence is not enough, Hungary completes its second beefed-up barrier to keep out refugees. But has the government violated international law? And be careful what you call your kids. China's largest province bans certain Muslim names. All week long, we'll be bringing you stories out of Hungary, and the subject of our first report has been months in the making. The nation has finished building a new and improved barrier along its border with Serbia. It's meant to make it impossible for refugees to enter in their search for a better life. Earlier this year, the government introduced legislation to round up asylum seekers and detain them in shipping containers, which advocates for refugees say violates EU law. But as Natalie Pohernan found out, there's strong support for the tough stance within the country.
Attention, attention. I'm warning you that you're at the Hungarian border.
Hungary is banking on the reverse of the motto, if you build it, they will come. It's spending almost $100 million to erect a second fence to keep out migrants and refugees who are in neighbouring Serbia. And so far, it's working. Last year, 5,700 people were caught crossing illegally in this district.
The building of the second fence started in March, and since then, the migration push has stopped in this section of the border.
This is both an EU and Schengen zone frontline, and even with a second fence, there will continue to be constant patrols. There's little sympathy for refugees who try to enter through these fields.
I don't understand why they leave their home. We don't leave our home.
Hungarian authorities are allowing just 10 asylum seekers to enter from Serbia each weekday. Anyone aged 14 years or older will be placed into one of 2 container camps, including this one, while their claim is being processed. The government says it's not detention because people are free to leave via a gate back to Serbia at any time. Just a few kilometres from the border is the heart of Tompa, a quiet, unassuming town. Its locals support the government's moves to keep refugees out.
On the one hand, I pity them. On the other hand, not. Because we heard many things about them, that they hurt people, committed killings, so we don't like them.
Because they are in poverty, they are fleeing from their bad destiny. That's what I think.
During the 2015 refugee crisis, more than 400,000 people crossed through Hungary. 2 years on, and those numbers have gone down sharply, but the political messaging around migration has not.
Migration turned out to be the Trojan horse of terrorism. Migration turned out to be an awful solution to labor shortages. Migration turned out to be more and more an NGO business.
The government is interested in keeping this on the agenda, on the top of the agenda all the time. They create these news, these happenings in order to convince the media that they should not talk about anything else, just the refugee issues and just the Hungarian government's fight against Brussels.
The Orban government has introduced mandatory detention for all asylum seekers. The European Commission's Vice President, Frans Timmermans, says the new asylum law raises serious doubts about compatibility with EU law. The UN's refugee agency has also told European Union states to stop sending asylum seekers back to Hungary. I asked to speak to one of the Hungarian Helsinki Committee's asylum seeker clients, but in the current environment, none wanted to go on camera.
There is no asylum anymore in Hungary. Refugees, should they come from war, from torture, from persecution, may not find protection in this EU member state.
One aspect of migration the country is investing in is training more people to patrol the border, to give the nation greater control over who enters. These kinds of measures have political support, including from the opposition nationalist party Jobbik.
The whole of Europe just seems to have gone insane with this Willkommenskultur and this liberal obsession with multiculturalism. If we don't manage to come to terms with this migration in a way which is suitable for everybody living in Europe, there is going to be complete chaos, and our whole continent and our whole civilization is going to collapse.
Hungary has set a hard course on migration policy. And many people in the EU are concerned it may prove a tempting model for other states in the bloc to follow. Natalie Pohanen, the Newsmakers in Budapest.
Well, joining me now from Brussels is Catherine Woolard. She's the Secretary General of the European Council on Refugees and Exiles. And in Budapest, Kitty McKenzie. She's the Senior Communications Officer of the UNHCR in Hungary. Thanks both of you for joining us. Catherine Woolard, good fences make good neighbors, I guess, for the Hungarians. They've doubled down. They've got their second fence down as they fortify themselves for the summer. Do they need it?
Well, I think that begs the question, what are they protecting themselves against? Vulnerable people who need international protection. We're highly concerned that these measures violate both EU and international law. What we're seeing at the Hungarian border are systematic violations, including pushbacks of people into Serbia, which is not a safe third country for them.
Kitty McKenzie, has this put you in a difficult position representing UNHCR in Hungary? They're not keen on refugees or migrants at all. Your very nature, you're designed to help refugees. How do you go about doing your job?
What I think is sad that we heard in this report is that there's a great deal of confusion. Sometimes it's being promoted intentionally about who refugees are. I heard in that report, I don't leave my home, why would they leave their home? It's important to remember that the asylum seekers in Hungary come from Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq. These are 3 countries at war. Nobody wants to be a refugee. So these people are fleeing for their very lives. They didn't choose to flee. I think that's really really important to remember. And what we're trying to do here in Hungary, we acknowledge that Hungary has a right to control its borders, to secure its borders. What we're trying to safeguard is the very right to claim asylum. This is a basic human right.
And Kitty, are they breaking the law? Are they breaking international standards and international law by putting people in shipping containers and denying refugees or asylum seekers the right to actually seek asylum, Kitty?
Hungary has systematically dismantled its asylum system, and denying the right to claim asylum is violating international human rights law. And one thing that is particularly disturbing is putting children into detention automatically simply for seeking asylum. And it's very disturbing that in these shipping containers on the border, some 40% of the people detained in these shipping containers are children.
Wow, 40%. Well, I wonder, Catherine, what you think of what the Interior Ministry State Secretary Karoli Contrat said. He said, and I'm going to quote him, by defending its borders, Hungary is also defending the Schengen zone. That's Karoli Contrat, Hungary's Interior Ministry State Secretary. Is that true that they're defending Schengen by being tough on their border?
Our concern is more that Hungary is undermining EU values and EU law. I think this is the real threat that the EU faces, is systemic undermining of the rule of law. We don't face a threat from refugees. Indeed, Europe could easily manage the numbers of people arriving. I think we've been arguing for tough measures to be taken against Hungary, including the European Commission starting infringement procedures for the new law on asylum, which is a clear violation of EU and international law. If other member states and the Commission don't start to get tough with Hungary, we have to raise the issue of complicity. And as you say, it may be that others want Hungary to be doing their dirty business at the borders.
But that's the paradox, isn't it, Catherine? Because if EU states, member states, other member states, particularly more powerful member states, get tough on Hungary, they can turn to their people and say, you see, these people don't take in refugees. We have to deal with the brunt, and now they want to punish us. Whereas in a democracy, there's a popular consensus to be tough on refugees. Our reporter found there as well, there was a lot of popular support for their tough policies.
Well, this is hardly surprising after the years of negative portrayal of refugees by the Hungarian government. I think this should raise the alarm bells in other member states. We're particularly concerned, of course, about the rise of the extreme right, but I think a greater threat is when mainstream parties start to adopt the rhetoric and analysis of the extremes. And this is essentially what's happened with Fidesz, which was a reasonable, moderate party and has now become a party that incites racial hatred and incites violations against refugees. I think our concern is also that the idea of the copycat effect. We're already seeing Poland suggesting measures such as the use of containers at the border, which follow the Hungarian model. This is why, exactly why a tougher approach to Hungary is necessary. There is a rule of law mechanism which was designed after a report in 2013 into wider human rights questions within Hungary. That could be used. We might eventually see an Article 7 procedure whereby Hungary's voting rights in the European Council will be suspended. I think other member states are fooling themselves if they think it's in their interest to allow Hungary and Orbán, the Hungarian government, to get away with these measures. We've seen Hungary, in fact, undermine the potential for a European solution to the crisis by refusing to go ahead with relocation measures and indeed challenging relocation. And the only way that Europe can collectively manage the situation with the arrival of refugees, of people who need international protection, is to have a system based on solidarity and division of responsibilities among the member states. And it's exactly this that Hungary is blocking.
Kitty, do you also fear that sort of copycat contagion with the likes of Poland and other countries will want to do what Hungary has been doing?
We're already seeing that, exactly as Catherine said, in Poland. I think there are two issues here. One is the rhetoric of the Hungarian government, but some of it is founded that Hungary wants to crack down on being a transit country, and this is a issue that needs to be tackled Europe-wide, that there cannot be just 2 or 3 countries that are destination countries and refugees just pass through and head to 2 or 3 countries. That's not fair on the taxpayers in those 2 or 3 countries. And the other issue is that there needs to be a better integration program in Hungary, that people who are recognized as refugees in Hungary have incentive to learn the language, to be able to contribute. Refugees do not want to be a burden on any taxpayers anywhere in the world. They want to contribute. They want to build a new life. They want to use their skills. They want to support their families. And it's important that they be given the opportunity. And this is one of the aspects that's lacking in the refugee program in Hungary that the UN Refugee Agency would really like to see.
Kitty, there are those who are saying, why is Hungary building another fence if only 165 people passed through or crossed over so far this year, whereas the government says it's precisely because we have one fence that only 165 crossed through, and now that we have a second fence, that'll go down to 0. Which one is true?
You know, the UN Refugee Agency is not the one building the fence. I suggest you ask the government of Hungary. What we're really concerned about is that the asylum system be effective, that people be allowed to enter the country and file their asylum claims, that they be heard fairly, that people who need international protection should get it in Hungary, and that the asylum system function. As I mentioned earlier in this program, the asylum system has been narrowed through physical borders, through legislative restrictions, through dismantlement. We would really like to see the asylum system functioning properly.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I am going to be talking to the Prime Minister's spokesman on Thursday. I want to ask you, Kitty, before I get a final comment from Catherine, I want to ask you, the government naming organizations, NGOs, almost blacklisting them. There's the Hungarian Helsinki Committee and the Civil Liberties Union, TASZ, and they call them representing the interests of illegal migrants against those of Hungary. Kitty, what do you make of that? Is that terribly unfair, and are they in some way inciting against these NGOs?
It's really important that the civil society space in Hungary be preserved, that there are lots of Hungarians we saw in 2015 who came forward to help refugees. In Keleti railway station here in Budapest, there were people who came out. It's really not appropriate to tar every Hungarian. The civil society space needs to stay open for NGOs, for people who of goodwill who want to come forward and help refugees and to exercise their democratic freedoms, their human rights. The Orban government does not need to control all the space. It's important for citizens to be able to exercise their democratic rights.
Catherine, I'm talking to the Prime Minister's spokesman later in the week. Is there anything in particular you want me to ask him?
Well, you could ask them why they feel so threatened by the arrival of a group of vulnerable people who need international protection. It would also be interesting, on your last point, to ask why they've put forward a law which will restrict the operations of civil society. We're very concerned about this. I think the reaction to the proposals to limit the operation of Central European University have been very positive. And we want to see a similar uprising against the bill on the table to limit the operations of civil society. Hungarian Helsinki Committee is a member of ACRE, it's one of our member organisations, and they are among the last defenders of human rights in Hungary. So widely we would like to see the reaction of EU leaders in support of those who are defending European Union law and European Union values within Hungary.
Okay, I'll pose those questions to him. No doubt. It's been a pleasure talking to both of you, Catherine Willard and Kitty McKenzie. Thanks so much for joining us. Tomorrow, we'll bring you a report from Budapest about a burgeoning political party run by Hungary's younger generation. Up next, though, a new segment called First Hand.
My name is Anat Bin Nun. I was born in Haifa, Israel. That's where I grew up. I joined Peace Now back when I was 11 years old, after the assassination of Prime Minister Rabin. Back then, I was already very politically involved. I think, unfortunately, the political situation in Israel leads many to be politically engaged in a very young age. I grew up during the Oslo Accords, definitely a period of hope for peace between Israelis and Palestinians. But people only a few years younger, they grew up in the Second Intifada. They only remember violence. I think the Israeli youth have definitely shifted to the right in recent years. There's a complete lack of interaction, I think, these days between Israelis and Palestinians. Also from the education system, learning that the Palestinian is the enemy.
Today we have a state of our own.
I think that it's important to say that there is a group of extremists that is controlling the public debate. I think that very often it seems, that all Israelis share the same views as Netanyahu, and this is obviously not the case. There is no kind of opportunity to humanize the other and to see, the Palestinians' real needs and the impact that they're suffering as a result of the occupation. I know it took me to go to the United States to meet with Palestinians and to learn more about their narrative in order to really get a full understanding of what happened here, in the last 70 years. We as Peace Now view settlements as the largest obstacle for a two-state solution, because their entire purpose is to prevent the possibility of a viable Palestinian state. I find that my opinion is in the minority at this point. Still, there are many in Israeli society who still support a two-state solution. In fact, polls are showing a small majority still in support of a two-state solution. I like this place. I really hope there would be a time where I would feel, proud of my government's policies. But I think for me, when I go abroad, it is important for me to explain exactly that, many of us are working every day in order to change the situation on the ground.
The Chinese government believes it has a gun. The Chinese communists took power out of the barrel of the gun, so they believe that's the only way to deal with every problem. They used the gun for 65 years to suppress Uyghurs, Tibetans, everybody else. But the problems are not disappearing, they're only getting bigger.
Naming your child is meant to be a source of joy, but for parents in Western China, it's not so straightforward. Xinjiang province is home to around 10 million Muslims, and it's now banned Muslim names it considers extreme. Names like Islam, Hajj, and Saddam. If parents ignore the law, their child can be denied healthcare and schooling. China's Muslim minority, the Uyghur ethnic group, says these are just the latest laws to restrict their rights. Long beards and burqas were recently outlawed, and the authorities track cars that belong to Uyghurs. Well, the government says the measures are aimed at curbing extremism and are part of a campaign against what it sees as a growing insurgency. So, is this a legitimate crackdown on terror or just religious repression? And will the laws only add to people's resentment towards the authorities? Well, to answer these questions, I'm joined by Nuri Turkel. He's a legal advisor to the World Uyghur Congress and chairman of the Uyghur Human Rights Project based in Washington, D.C. Thanks so much for joining us, Nuri. So, is this part of a legitimate war on terror? That's what the Chinese think. Tell me why you disagree.
Since 9/11, Chinese government has opportunistically misused and for its domestic consumption and the international community to claim that they too a victim of terrorism. There's right before 9/11, they claimed that the Chinese controlled area of Xinjiang, East Turkestan, is a safe place and foreign investment should be poured in. So they changed the course. To the Chinese government, Uyghurs' ethno-national identity is a stumbling block for their strategic and deliberate means and policies to dilute, eventually destroy the Uyghurs' centuries-old ethnic and cultural heritage. Mm-hmm. The recent wave of legislative initiatives and implementation further prove that the Chinese government see Uyghur Islam as a political threat. They have tried for decades, in a similar way that they have done in Tibet, advocating and enforcing and imposing their version of a Chinese culture. The Uyghurs and Tibetans have resisted. And the Chinese government see Tibetan religion and Uyghurs Islamic faith as a major obstacle. And the international community should take some responsibility as well. Some of the Western governments and some of the Muslim governments have been a strange bedfellow with the Chinese.
Let me ask you about that. Nuri, sorry to interrupt you. Let me ask you about that, right? So you mentioned the Tibetans. The Dalai Lama calls it a cultural genocide of Tibetan culture, what's happening there. Many Uyghurs I've spoken to say the same thing is happening in Xinjiang. So you have Tibet. It's very high profile, far higher profile than the situation in Xinjiang. And still, the Tibetans can't really get anything out of it. Nobody wants to fight with the Chinese in the international community, as you say. So what hope is there for the Uyghur Muslims if even the Tibetans can't get anything and they have such a high profile?
At least they have a legislative and societal grassroots support, whereas the Uyghurs have nothing. That's why the Chinese government have been punishing the Uyghurs right and left with impunity. There's no country except for the United States and occasionally Turkey speak out against the Chinese aggression. But because of this intertwined economic relationship that the United States and China have, and also some regional issues that the United States need Chinese help, it has been the human rights issues, particularly the Uyghur human rights issues, have been taken a sidestep, if not completely ignored. But when the Chinese talks to the West, particularly the United States, they focus on counterterrorism efforts. The Chinese claim that the United States has been applying double standard, in which the United States don't see eye to eye when it comes to so-called Uyghur terrorism. And the Chinese are very, very upset about it. And they see some possibilities in the Trump administration because of the North Korea, because of the Syria and other regional conflicts that the United States need Chinese help. So the situation was bad, but it's getting worse both in domestic and international fronts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Nuri, love the motherland and learn Mandarin to help fight the perception that you are terrorists. That's what some members of the Communist Party, Uyghur members of the Communist Party, have been saying in Chinese state media recently, and that's being pushed out. How is that being received by Uyghurs in Xinjiang and Uyghurs in the diaspora? The fact that you have these Uyghurs who are members of the Communist Party saying, hey, be loyal to China.
I can summarize, I can give you 2 sentences to illustrate the lives of the Uyghur people. But one, they feel suffocated. There's nothing that they do seem to be right for the Chinese government. For example, just recently, a cadre, a government official, refused to smoke in front of an elderly religious people. It's a sign of respect that you don't do smoking, drinking in front of elderlies or elderly family members. That person, being a Chinese government official, being disfavored, if not punished. It is there. So people feel suffocated. They're confused. They don't know what to do and how. Regardless how hard they try to be a good citizen for the Chinese, they're not good enough. And then 2, the Uyghur people feel like they live in an open-air prison. They can move around, they can go to the restaurants to eat, but since they spiritually been so restricted, their daily lives have been watched. If you go to Urumqi, you see nothing but cameras, police cars patrolling around, forced disappearances are common. So the Uyghur people feel suffocated and feel like live in an open-air prison.
Mm-hmm. I remember speaking to Rabia Kadir, your leader in Washington, D.C. Tell me a little bit about leadership and the fact that, you know, the leadership is very disconnected from what's happening on the ground because she's in exile, and there are other Uyghur communities in Germany and elsewhere who claim to be leading the global community. Do the Uyghurs have a leadership problem?
Uyghurs don't have a leadership problem, but but the Chinese government creating some problems. For example, restricting the freedom of movement of the World Uyghur Congress leadership. Luckily, United States government, particularly the Congress, have been very supportive. There are a lot of places that the Uyghur leadership can go and debrief the situation and advise the U.S. government on certain things that need to be done immediately. So Chinese government would like to create crisis, even like to a World Uyghur Congress, or like to collapse. That's what they do. Divide and conquer is one of the useful methods for any authoritarian governments to do. Confusing people is another. So they have been successful by using their international influence in diplomatic and economic arena to pressure certain governments to restrain, if not restrict, Uyghur leadership's freedom of movement around the world.
Nuri Turkel, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thanks so much for taking the time. It's time to go off script. New York Times columnist Bret Stephens had a novel plan for the Middle East recently. He tweeted to his more than 70,000 followers that the US should partition Syria, reward Kurds, Alawite state if Assad overthrown, no fly, no drive, multinational Arab force versus ISIS, US air, Israel support. So this is sort of what it would look like. Over there, we tried our best to imagine it. This is not the first out-of-the-box approach to remapping the Middle East to solve its problems. In 2006, retired Colonel Ralph Peters gave his vision to stop the bloodshed in Armed Forces Journal. It included a free Kurdistan, a free Baluchistan, separate Sunni and Shia states. Israel left as is, with the West Bank labeled status undetermined. 7 years later, in the New York Times, Robin Wright went a few steps further, splitting 5 countries into 14 as a possible way things could play out. Wright's plan included the tremendously named Wahhabistan, Shiitistan, Alawitistan, and Sunnistan. These are good ideas, creative solutions to complex problems, which got me thinking the United States is deeply divided under the Trump regime. Hundreds of thousands have protested against the president, especially since he lost the popular vote. Blacks, Latinos, Muslims, and women. Using the 2016 election results as a template, these were the states that voted for Trump in red, and these were the ones that opted for Clinton in blue. Let us partition America and get ahead of ethnic conflict. Reward blacks and Muslims, with Illinois as a separate free black Muslim state, of which former President Barack Hussein Obama was the senator. An alt-right state from Texas through North Carolina if Trump is overthrown. If he isn't overthrown, an independent Texas Free State must be declared under UN supervision. No fly, no drive. I don't really know what Stephens meant by no drive, but let's do it anyway. A multinational Christian force versus the KKK in Arkansas. I met those guys. They're dangerous. Canadian air support for a single state along the 2 coastlines, which voted for Hillary Clinton, a state founded in opposition to the misogyny of the president, and it will be called Girlistan. The new America will be compact and strong. This is why we give Alaska back to Russia and Hawaii to Japan. For California, like the West Bank, status undetermined, with a proposed gluten-free corridor running across California and Oregon between San Francisco and Portland, just to prevent any future bread riots. What do you think? Think it'll work? That's all for the first of our new hour-long edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.